Hi everybody, and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar here at Purdue University. It's my great pleasure to introduce today Professor Nora Rifon from Michigan State University. And the thing that I actually got very interested in the research that she's doing is because I've always been very interested in psychology, but I've never seen that applied in security context. And Professor Rifon is going to talk today about network security begins at home, how to change consumer behavior for eye safety. And the last thing that I would like to mention is that she also has a very interesting background, started in psychology, has a PhD in management, and today is going to tell us how to apply all these techniques in the context of security and privacy.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm going to stay still, which is hard for me because when I lecture, I usually walk around, so I hope I don't fidget too much. As Christina said, my name is Nora Rifon. I'm a professor at Michigan State University. I happen to be not in computer science, but in the Department of Advertising, Public Relations, and Retailing, which betrays my background, which is actually in psychology and in business. So my doctorate is in an area where I studied mostly marketing and became a consumer behavior expert. And over the years, my interests evolved to where I find myself today studying privacy and security. And I have some interesting stories about being a duck out of water, or a fish out of water, and sitting in NSF panels with all the computer scientists saying, "How did you get here? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I got this CyberTrust award," and they all said, "Oh, CyberTrust!" And I thought, okay, I belong now. So that sort of was my certification to belong to the club, maybe. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk about an approach that I've developed along with some colleagues at Michigan State, and it's an approach that examines. Go right ahead. I can pause a minute. Sure, no problem. It's an approach that's looking at privacy and security issues in a more global sense. It tries to incorporate some psychological paradigms into this problem. Okay. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues. In particular, my colleague Bob LaRose, who I would, as a co-sharer, we're both a part of this development and the ideas. Richard Enbody, who is our computer scientist. And I also want to acknowledge the support we've had recently from CyberTrust and Microsoft Research. We're very lucky to have some funding from these groups who have allowed us to actually do some of the things we really want to do. I think what I'd first like to do is introduce you to the concept of privacy as we conceptualize it, and then sort of lead you through what my experiences have been that got me to looking at security. So I started out studying privacy, and you can see from this slide that privacy actually is multidimensional, and not everybody recognizes this. I think many people think of privacy as informational privacy, so that consumers protecting their information from those terrible database managers. But it's really multidimensional, so that you can talk about your physical privacy and wanting to be alone physically. Psychological privacy, where you have control over your own thoughts and emotions. And you might say, how could you not? But I can tell you that are probably Holocaust survivors who will tell you that was a struggle, or other people who have been imprisoned, or places where control is a very important issue over your thoughts and your emotions. And then finally, the one that we're all familiar with is informational privacy, or to some people trying to maintain anonymity. And that means controlling one's personal information. Essential to understanding privacy and studying privacy is to recognize that this is really a discussion of boundary maintenance. We assume that there are boundaries between the individual and other forces in the environment and in the world. And privacy itself is giving control of that boundary maintenance to the individual. Much of the work in privacy really originated in the area of database marketing and consumer privacy. And it's still a recent area of study. And I'd say it was only in the late 90s that people began in marketing to talk about data privacy and informational privacy, consumer privacy. Within this context, we define consumer privacy as control over the unwanted presence in the environment, and control over information that's obtained during marketing transactions. And I think you're all probably pretty familiar with that. So, for instance, recently, if you go anywhere to purchase something, you go to a true brick and mortar institution, you don't buy it online, and they say, "Can I have your phone number?" And most people say, "Well, okay, what's that for?" And someone like me says, "No." And what do you need that for? And it's marketing research, it's identification. I go to Toys R Us. Toys R Us says, "We need that because if we get your phone number, that's your ID tag that we have in our database. And if we know you're here, we're going to send you a coupon." That's part of what the dilemma is that I'm going to talk about today, is how much do people want to give up for so little? And what does that have to do with boundary management? And what does that have to do with security as well? Anyway, so consumer privacy started out as our paradigm. And what I wanted to tell you a little bit about was how I came to study this, because I really was studying other problems. Privacy and security was the farthest thing from my mind. I was a consumer researcher, and I studied a lot of consumer protection and regulation issues. I studied things like the Nutrition, Labeling, and Education Act. Things that you would say, well, what does that have to do with this? It turns out that the state attorneys general, I think 48 of them, wrote a letter to the head of the FTC a few years back saying it's time that we create privacy policies in line with things like the NLEA. And they're demanding that other regulatory models be used for privacy. Well, so here I was working in one area, and the Attorney General of the state of Michigan approached me and said, "Would you please work with us for a few months? We want to know what should a policy agenda be for the coming years." And after working with them for a few months, I said to them, "I think you're telling me that consumer privacy issues are growing in numbers and that they're never going to go away." And they said, "That's true." And then it turned out that our Attorney General, Jennifer Granholm, became our governor. She's now Governor Granholm. And so she does have this as a policy agenda. Unfortunately, we have other economic issues that prevent her from doing too much about privacy. But so my interest was piqued, and I could see that this was a new area where a lot of people weren't there yet. Nobody was really talking about this in the right way. So I started studying. So at first, I really looked at privacy policies. I looked at regulation. I was looking at, and what I have here is a list of some things that I studied in some of my research. And trust signals and warning information really constituted the beginning of my looking at consumer privacy. And what that means is I looked at how do consumers respond to signals on websites that communicate about privacy and trust. So I worked in that area. I've studied a little bit about what privacy policies should be. In particular, I was invited to also evaluate the state of Michigan for its privacy policies and procedures in terms of citizen information. So at a very high level, I've also been involved in looking at what are policies that should be enacted for the protection of citizen information. And if some of you really knew how much information the state had, you wouldn't care about marketers, believe me. Because what states have about you, and it's not managed very well in any state, that's a real threat to your privacy, probably more so than what Toys R Us has.